أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء وسيد المرسلين وحبيب إله العالمين أبي القاسم محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجه، وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المكرمين الغرر الميامين، سيما بقية الله في الأراضين وحجته على الخلائق أجمعين، سيدنا وإمام زماننا وصاحب نعمتنا وولي أمرنا مهدي هذه الأمة وطاووس أهل الجنة الحجة بن الحسن العسكري، فداه أرواح العالمين. My dear brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Ali ibn Mahziyar, a companion of the Imams, narrates a hadith that he attributes in a connected chain to our eighth Imam, Ali ibn Musa al-Ridha alayhi alaf al-tahiyyati was-salam. The hadith is narrated in Al-Shaykh Ibn Babawayh Al-Qummi Al-Saduq in his book Al-Khisal, a great book that I've talked about in this blessed place, also known as the Book of Attributes. It's been translated into English for those who are interested. He says, عن علي بن موسى الرضا عليه السلام أنه قال: يأتي على الناس زمان تكون العافية فيه 10 أجزاء، 9 منها في الصمت و1 في اعتزال الناس. صدق مولانا ومقتدانا وسيدنا علي بن موسى الرضا عليه الصلاة والسلام. You might have heard this hadith before. It was unfortunately for a while misinterpreted and mischaracterized, especially when the pandemic first hit back in March or April of 2020. The hadith talks about a particular time when trials and tribulations reach fever pitch. And the Imam provides a prescription. He says that if you wish to remain safe, if you wish to maintain your spiritual health, you should follow this prescription. Before I actually get into that, I think it goes without saying that the times we're in are times of extreme trials and tribulations. And I'm not even talking about the natural disasters, the global pandemic that brought the entire planet to a grinding halt. I'm not talking about how a lot of people toward the middle of 2020 were talking about the beginning of the year or the last part of 2019 being such catastrophic times, and you had the wild bushfires in Australia, you had mayhem in many parts of the world, you had the Amazon jungle go up in flames, you had all kinds of problems. And then things began to happen which basically made people forget all about the previous disasters. I'm not even talking about the impending doom and gloom of climate change and how the world is getting warmer and how this global warming is leading to sea levels rising and all manner of disasters happening as a result of that. Entire countries disappearing from the map. I'm not even talking about those things. I'm talking about the moral deprivation. I'm talking about the humanitarian disasters, the kinds that would bring entire nations to their knees. I'm talking about the fact that when you speak to someone from Iraq these days, they'll tell you how bad things are. And when somebody tells you Iraq is in a bad shape, you know it's bad, because Iraq has seen some really bad times. But that's the thing, right? That's the nature of humans. We forget about Iraq in 2003. We forget about Iraq in the 1980s and 90s. We forget about Iraq in 2006 and 2007 at the height of the civil war and the sectarian strife. Now they tell you it's really bad. If you speak to someone from Lebanon, they'll tell you something very similar. Oh, it's bad, it's bad. And that's all they'll say, because no matter how hard you squint, you can't really find any reason to be optimistic. When you talk to someone about the situation in Iran, it's the same. And so I think there's no question that we're living in times of extreme trial and difficulty, not just on an individual level or even a communal level, but a global level, right? So could we call this Akhiru Zaman? Could we confidently describe the world we're in as the time that precedes the reappearance of the Savior? Is it possible? The answer is absolutely, yeah. It's very possible. And we wouldn't be alone if we made that claim. Christians also believe that they live in what they call the latter days. And the latter days are the days that the book of Revelations and the Old Testament talk about. We're talking about global famine, pandemics, fires, earthquakes. So we wouldn't be the only people who imagine that this world we're living in now is as difficult as it is. It's only going to get more and more difficult. It has to hit rock bottom before it starts to bounce back up. So, this means that in addition to the earthquakes and the pandemics and the floods and the natural disasters, there's going to be moral pandemics. There is going to be reason for panic on a spiritual level. Things that are so difficult that you can't just wear a mask and protect yourself. You'd have to take some drastic measures. And we see that happening right before our two eyes, right? For example, one of the negative repercussions or manifestations of the latter days is that people become, they get swept away with misconceptions. The world no longer has any rock to stand on. You know what I mean? It's like, what's even real anymore? What is our system of belief? What are we supposed to believe in as Muslims, as Shia, as followers of the Ahlul Bayt? Like, there's too many opinions out there. And the tragedy of it is that you hear things like that from so-called scholars, or at least people who appear like scholars. There's too many conflicting views on this issue. Essentially, taking people's solid beliefs and turning them into doubts. Certainties being turned into confusion. There are too many opinions about this, and you can believe in whichever one you want. But what's the actual ruling? What's the actual belief? What's the truth? It's almost as though if you take your beliefs from social media or from your immediate circle of friends and relatives, it appears that there is no truth. There is no capital T truth, as they say. It's all one big pile of confusions and misconceptions and just people not knowing where to go. It's like we're lost in this never-ending maze and there's no way out. It's just a big lie. You think it's a maze with an actual solution, but there isn't. It's like the rat race. You know the hamster that they put in that wheel and it just keeps spinning and spinning? It thinks it's getting somewhere, but it's really not. And because you get to see the bigger picture, because you're the designer of that little game, you know what's going on, but the hamster has no idea. And so, unless we find our true north, unless we try to discover our moral compass, unless we have something to stand on, something to lean on, you're going to be confused. And it's only getting worse. It's downhill from here, I'm sorry to say. You have people nowadays coming out, casting doubt about the marja'iyah. Bring me one hadith that tells you need to follow a marja' and emulate another human being in your religious laws and or beliefs. One hadith. You know what the best response is to someone who makes such an allegation, such a challenge or claim? The best response is to say, I'm no expert on this. And sure as hell, neither are you. You sprouted out in social media like yesterday. You're just a virtual personality as far as I'm concerned. You're someone who might get invited in a couple of centers, but you're no expert. My dear brother, friend, / add whatever adjective you want. You are no expert on the matter. You and I both have to refer to the experts. And don't act like you've somehow made a new discovery. It's like Al-Allam al-Hilli didn't know this. He didn't catch this big gaping hole in our beliefs, right? As-Sayyid al-Yazdi, Sahib al-Urwa, Ridwanullah ta'ala alayh, he never caught this, right? As-Sayyid al-Hakim, who came after him and wrote the Mustadrak on the Urwa, he never caught this. Our esteemed Maraja' never caught this. Even though they spend their entire lives learning and researching, they never caught it. And now this random Joe, whose entire reputation rests on a Facebook profile or a Twitter profile or an Instagram, whatever, suddenly you're the savior of this religion? You're now the expert who discovered that one big issue that every previous marja' never caught? Imagine if someone came out and started a YouTube channel, because now, back in the day, you had to start TV channels, and it was extremely difficult. You needed a lot of resources, which meant that you needed the support of the community, the scholars, the ulama, the marja'iyah. Nowadays, you could just start a YouTube channel. And then coming out and saying, look, these 3 biologists and geneticists who discovered the biological mechanism behind the circadian rhythm, they don't know what they're talking about. There is no circadian rhythm. It's all a hoax. It's all a lie. They've made it so they can enrich themselves. You'd be the laughing stock because you're no biologist. You're no geneticist. Those were Nobel-winning scientists. Maybe they know a thing or two that you and I don't. So don't express any opinions on a matter about which you are no expert. But see, the reason people like that, who come out these days and cast doubt on fundamental issues, and they know full well how important the marja'iyah system is in preserving the legacy of our rich faith tradition. They know that it's a pillar that protects the Shia as a distinct religious entity. They know the significance of this institution, which is why they attack it. And I'm not talking about any specific marja', because maraja' can have their flaws. They make mistakes. We have documented mistakes by maraja'. But I'm speaking about the institution. I'm speaking about marja'iyya as a whole. Right? The people who attack it know exactly what they're doing. Because they realize that the marja'iyya is our last defense against external threats, against the barrage of misconceptions that are pouring into our communities. And so they are the most treasonous individuals. By undermining our defenses, by weakening our protection mechanism, they know exactly what they're doing. But see, the reason they exist is just like parasites. Why does a parasite exist? Because it finds an unwitting host it can feast on. If these imposters didn't have unsuspecting, ignorant hosts like me, they wouldn't exist. They wouldn't have anyone to feed on. So it's not their fault, although of course they will face their recompense on the Day of Judgment, but it's our fault. It's the fact that we are ignorant, which means that we will continue to give such imposters a platform and a podium. If we stopped feeding into their lies, if we stopped listening to them, if we stopped giving them any attention, they would cease to exist, because a parasite needs a host. In fact, we have a hadith in which the Imam says that the shaitan is so arrogant, yuridu an yuta', he loves to be obeyed. So when you disobey the shaitan, he leaves you alone. In other words, when you don't give him a platform, when you don't let him feast on your brain, he leaves you and goes to the next unsuspecting victim. So, you and I, brothers and sisters, are responsible. Amir al-Mu'mineen says, Al-Batilu yamutu bitarki dhikrih. Don't give it any attention. Don't give it any bandwidth. Don't listen to them. Whether they're speakers or scholars, or it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Simply ignore them. Stick to what you know. Ibn Sikit came to Imam al-Rida alayhi salatu wassalam. He said to him, Yabna Rasulullah, with all this confusion, what do we do? How do we tell which way to go? The Imam said, Alayka bil-aql. Use your intellect. Use your true north. Use the compass that Allah has given you. Tusaddiq as-sadiq. Use it in order to verify the truthful nature of that person who's telling you the truth, and to verify the lies of the liars. Ibn Sakit responded by saying, Hada wallahi al-jawab. That is the best answer I ever got. Use your intellect. It's easy. Once you resort to the intellect, once you turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, once you seek His guidance, it's easy to tell that this person is a liar. This person's trying to undermine the marja'iyya, for example. This person's trying to destroy this institution by attacking its source of funding, like khums. Who says this, that? Just don't listen to them. There's no reason to insult them, no reason to attack them. Simply shut them off. Best thing you can do. And the problem is, you then have otherwise religious individuals, those who are motivated to support the Ahlul Bayt, to spread their love. They're the ones who get swept away. The non-religious crowd, there's really not much you can do. They have a problem, a fundamental problem with religion. It's the religious ones that end up becoming the unsuspecting hosts for those parasites, for those parasitic creatures. And so suddenly you see a whole group of people gravitating towards an individual. Why? Because he's really good at cursing. He's really good at swearing. Swearing at who? At the enemies of the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, which was fine. But isn't it strange, and isn't it heartbreaking that you have our rich legacy, our tradition of debating with the other side with dignity and honor and in a scholarly, fashion being reduced down to someone who knows how to swear and make people laugh? Isn't it pathetic that Al-Allamatul Hilli, for example, writes a book called Al-Alfiyyah أو الألفين في فضائل أمير المؤمنين. That book he wrote as a gift to Al-Jaltio, who was the Mongolian king of the Muslim Empire. He gave the book as a gift to him. I've talked about his story at length in another lecture. He gave this book as a gift to him because Al-Jaltio told him that I'm a Sunni and I would like you to tell me what your faith is about. And he was based in Iran, so the entire nation was also Sunni. He said, look, you're a Shia, you have Sunnis as well. I don't know what's what. How about you give me your arguments in a brief and concise manner? Al-Allamatul Hilli wrote this book. The reason it's called Al-Alfayn is because it contains 2,000 pieces of evidence, 2,000 arguments on the superiority of Amir al-Mu'mineen from the Quran. Exclusively. Imagine that. 2,000. Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam says, مَنْ لَمْ يَعْرِفْ أَمْرَنَا مِنَ الْقُرْآنِ. If you can't prove your faith from the Quran, then you will not be protected from the confusion and the misconceptions. Start with the Quran. So he compiles this book, 2,000 arguments, and he gives it as a gift to Al-Jaltio. Al-Jaltio read the book. Within a week he said to him, أشهد أن عليا ولي الله. اللهم صل على محمد. That legacy is now reduced into people cursing and swearing and using vulgar profanities and just making a laughing stock out of the tradition of the Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam. Isn't that heartbreaking? So you have people on, subhanallah, whichever way you look, you've got all these deviants, you've got all these parasitic creatures anyway. So Imam al-Rida alayhi salam says that you live in these very troubling times. What do? He says, wellness in this era, wellness, being protected from spiritual ailments and diseases, is going to be in 10 parts. We have 2 versions of this hadith. The one that I read from Al-Khisal, the Imam says, تَكُونُ فِيهِ الْعَافِيَةُ عَشَرَةُ أَجْزَاء تِسْعَةٌ مِنْهَا فِي الصَّمْتِ. 9 of them is in keeping quiet. وَوَاحِدَ فِي اعْتِزَالِ النَّاسِ, which I'll explain. The other version of the hadith is the other way around. It's the opposite. The Imam says, تِسْعَةٌ مِنْهَا فِي اعْتِزَالِ النَّاسِ وَوَاحِدَ فِي الصَّمْتِ. What is samt? Samt is to be quiet. And being quiet doesn't mean you're the quiet type. It means don't speak about matters of which you don't know. Don't express your views and opinions about issues that you have no expertise in. Also, do not reveal everything that you believe in. Do not expose your ideological positions to anyone and everyone. Also, it means you shouldn't expose every detail in your life to everyone out there, which, given social media and how people get their dose of dopamine on social media, is now something that's almost non-existent. There is no such thing as privacy anymore. People know everything about everyone. Have your own set of secrets. A secret, we think of a secret as something that's dirty and disgusting and something that needs to be hidden away so it doesn't make me look bad. But it shouldn't be that way. A secret is things that have to do with you and no one else, to the exclusion of others. As-samt, be quiet. Most importantly, do not express your views about matters that you have no expertise in. Ask anyone, sit in a gathering, ask a question that has to do with religion. If there are 10 people there, you're going to get 12 different opinions on the matter. Suddenly, we all feel entitled to an opinion. I've heard people actually say, how dare you stifle speech and not let people express their views and opinions? Just go back to the example that I cited earlier about the random nobody who comes on TV to express his views about the circadian rhythm. Because he looks good, or because he wears a turban, or because he's got a bunch of nice tattoos, or whatever it is. Just because I think I'm entitled to opinion does not give me the right to express an opinion. Because I am no expert, I cannot believe I have to re-emphasize this. This should be a no-brainer. And yet, when it comes to religion, this rule no longer applies. And then we wonder why we have so much deviation. We wonder why we're in such a sorry state. So, number one, the Imam says, be quiet. Number two, i'tizal al-nas. How much time do I have before Adhan, Sayyidina? About 10, 15 minutes maybe? Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. I'tizal, this is important. That's why I asked how much time we have. I'tizal means to separate yourself from others. Now, the first thing that's going to come to mind is that what our religion wants? Isn't our religion about being open and welcoming and embracing? Why is the Imam telling us that we should isolate ourselves? This is the part that was mischaracterized at the start of the pandemic. Oh, it's about social distancing. No, it's not. Because the Imam isn't talking about physical wellness. Hence, as-samt. If this was about physical health, why would the Imam say be quiet? What's that got to do with physical health? He's speaking about spiritual health, ya akhi. This is one of the reasons why those who are ignorant shouldn't speak. Do not misinterpret the hadiths of the Ahlul Bayt. Be quiet, sit at home. The Imam says, i'tizal. What does that mean? Should we physically isolate from people to remain spiritually healthy? Is that what our religion is teaching us? The answer is absolutely. Two caveats to keep in mind though. Number one, what exactly is the definition of i'tizal? Does that mean we shouldn't meet anyone? Does that mean that this is confined to a specific time frame? Because the Imam says, يَأْتِي عَلَى النَّاسِ زَمَانٌ. There will be a time when people, in order to preserve their health, their wellness, meaning spiritual wellness, they have to do these two things. So is this specific to a certain time and place? So, number one, we need to define what i'tizal means. I'tizal, if taken generically, it means you don't meet with anyone. Essentially, you become a monk, right? The Quran even speaks about ruhbaniyah. وَرُهْبَانِيَّةً ابْتَدَعُوهَا. I believe it's in Surah Al-Hadid. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that they invented this new monasticism, this new way of life, whereby they would leave their towns, leave their cities, leave civilized communities, and resort to a cave, for example. Or they would go into the jungle, or they'd go into the desert and find a little refuge, build a little hut, live there for the rest of their lives in order to be immune from the spiritual diseases and ailments. Buddhism is based on this. Buddhist monasticism is about this. That's why they create a monastery, and all of these people go and live in those monasteries for the rest of their lives. They never have any wives, any children, any job, and all they do is just sit there, practice yoga or whatever it is they do, and play with the ants and the flies, and not the flies, the butterflies, right? So that's one way of looking at it. Do not interact with other people so you can stay safe. Kind of makes sense, right? Islam, however, fought with this kind of monasticism. Which is why in the same verse where Allah speaks about the innovation of this monasticism, He says, fasiqun, the majority of them are impious. They weren't good people. They invented this and they claim that they live in a cave, but God knows what they're doing inside those caves. Suddenly you have a lawsuit, sexual assault against minors. The guy's supposed to be a man of God, a man of the cloak, he's a priest. But then what he's doing to the choir boys is anybody's guess. So one day, a woman comes to the Holy Prophet ﷺ. I'll try and summarize. She complained about her husband. Who was her husband? Her husband was a man who was a childhood friend of Rasulullah ﷺ. Like most people have never heard about the Prophet having a childhood friend. Like we know that he had companions who were the good, the bad, and the ugly. But to have an actual childhood friend, there was one person. What was his name? Uthman ibn Mad'un. This great individual was, we could talk a lot about his personality. Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam in Nahj al-Balagha says, كان لي فيما مضى أخ في الله يعظمه في عيني صغر الدنيا في عينه. The fact I looked up to him as a great man because of how lowly he saw the world in his eyes. He never allowed sultanu batnih, as the Imam says, the beast, the monster of his stomach, he never allowed it to defeat him. So he always ate whatever he had available, never ate too much. So the Imam talks about him. Great sermon that you should look up. كان لي فيما مضى أخ في الله. This person is Uthman ibn Mad'un. The Prophet loved him, so much so that when he died, he was the first person to be buried in Al-Baqi' al-Gharqad. And later when the Prophet's son Ibrahim died, and the Prophet's daughter Zainab died, the Prophet said, I shall bury you next to my brother Uthman ibn Mad'un. Imagine. In other words, it was an honor to be buried next to this man. And yet, when his wife came to the Prophet, she complained to him. She said, Ya Rasulullah, my husband has left me alone. He doesn't uphold his responsibilities towards me as his wife. And he goes out there and lives in a cave in the name of worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The Prophet became so angry, listen to this, that he got up, his cape, his aba' was still hanging from one side and dragging on the ground. That's how much in a hurry the Prophet was. And he rushed towards Uthman ibn Mad'un, admonished him and said to him, you have no right to do this. Go back. The Prophet said to him, I'm a prophet of God and yet I have my wives, I have my life, I have my, I have children, I go to work, I teach, I preach. It doesn't mean that you should become a monk. To be a Muslim means you have to balance your life. So, that's not the kind of uzla that Islam wants from us. The hadith that Imam Rida alayhi salam mentioned, that in order for you to protect yourself against spiritual diseases, isn't saying that you should live in a cave. Although, sometimes, if you must do that, then you should. Like Ashabul Kahf. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks highly of them. They practice taqiyya to the point where the hadith says, Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam says, that they used to wear this belt which was a sign of kufr. To wear this belt meant that you didn't believe in God. They even wore that belt because they had to live in dissimulation and taqiyya. But at some point, they could no longer practice taqiyya. They were placed between a rock and a hard place, and they had to either choose between God or abandon belief in God. So they left all of that and they went to the cave. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala praises them for that. There are times when you must. There is no choice. Like the height of a pandemic, you gotta go into lockdown. However, generally speaking, that's not what Islam wants from us. What does Islam want? Listen very carefully before I wrap up. Islam wants us to disassociate from those who are sinful. That's much harder than you might think right now. To not be friends with those who are sinful, those who are impious, those who hold false beliefs. Don't hang around them. Don't be friends with them. Yes, if you must interact with them, the guy happens to be your taxi driver, happens to be your local grocery store owner, happens to be your neighbor that you say hi to every once in a while, sure. But to actually interact and be friends with them, that's exactly what the Imam is telling us not to do. So many ahadith about not mixing with those who are fasiq. We have a hadith that says that if you befriend and sit with someone who is tariqus salat, it's as if you have killed 70 prophets. Tariqus salat. He knows salat is obligatory, he doesn't want to pray. Oh, but he's my cousin, he's my friend, he's my neighbor, he's my classmate. Those excuses simply will not keep you safe. It doesn't matter whether he's your cousin. If he has a highly infectious disease like the Ebola virus, would you sit with him? He can be your mom and dad for all I care. You wouldn't. You'd protect yourself. He could be your loving husband or wife. You'd protect yourself. All of a sudden, when it comes to religion, when it comes to our values, it doesn't matter. 70 prophets. Why? Because these prophets of Allah were sent, and their bedrock, the bedrock of their religion was as-salat, as-salat, as-salat. The last 3 words that came out of the blessed mouth of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And yet, I couldn't care less. The guy chooses not to pray. So what? Let's go hang out. Let's go chill. Let's go have fun. I can't. If I do, then you will become infected. And then you'll have no one to blame but yourself. So, it used to be that we'd get around and we'd sit down physically, right? In which case you'd have to figure out, is this person good? Is this person a bad influence? Should I sit with them? Should I not sit with them? It was simple, right? It was like binary. It was yes or no. And it was limited too. Nowadays, we sit with practically anyone and everyone in a virtual setting on social media. We're with everybody. I read somewhere the other day, or I think it was part of a documentary actually, that said, when you wake up in the morning, do you check your phone before going to the bathroom, or do you check your phone while you're in the bathroom? Because those are the only 2 choices that you have. A social media executive was saying this, and it's true. We're with these people 24/7. You get jokes from people at 3 a.m. It's like, I doubt, given the nature of the joke that I just got, that you were praying Salatul Layl at that exact time when you sent it. So, what do we do? Avoid people who are sinful. He came to Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam. He said to the Imam said to him, I saw you with such and such the other day. I've mentioned this hadith many times before. Then the Imam said to him, do you know this person has a deviant belief? He said, yeah, but he's my uncle. Innahu khali. The Imam said to him, listen, choose between us or him. You want to be with this man? Go be with him. Just don't come to me anymore. Even though he was his uncle. Let alone random strangers online that we happen to befriend and we happen to retweet and like their post and whatever. Who are these people? Why am I letting them into my life? Anyway, we'll wrap up. لا تنظروا. It's a hadith by Prophet Isa alayhi salam. لا تنظروا إلى أموال أهل الدنيا. Do not even look at the people, at the wealth, the pomposity, the prestige, the cars, the houses, the mansions, the money of the people of this dunya, those people who are deviant. لا تنظروا إلى أموال أهل الدنيا فإن بريق أموالهم يذهب بنور إيمانكم. What a beautiful hadith. Because the glamour and the glitter and the shine of their money, their lives, will take away the light of your faith, the light of your beliefs. However, what do you do in these times? You have to seek refuge somewhere. You have to find a place that's going to give you protection. Where do you go? You go to your Imam. You go to the Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam. Al-Kahf al-Hasin wa Ghiyath al-Muthtar al-Mustakeen. You go to the Imam of your time. You seek refuge in him. You try and figure out what the truth is. The other day somebody sent me a message saying, Sayyid, this particular marja', is he okay with that particular marja' or is he not? I said, look, Amir al-Mu'mineen set the record straight. The Imam said, إِنَّ الْحَقَّ لَا يُعْرَفُ بِالرِّجَالِ اعْرِفِ الْحَقَّ تَعْرِفْ أَهْلَهِ. The truth is not found by the barometer of men. You don't discover the truth through individuals. You discover the truth first, then you analyze the individuals. Then you decide whether those individuals are good or bad. You have to start with the truth. One of the teachers used to say that the way I look at religion is that even if my marja' that I follow right now, if I discover that this person is a Mossad agent, imagine that. My marja' is a deviant. My marja' is a kafir in disguise, trying to act as a Shia. If this happens to me, wallah, my belief in Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam, in Fatima az-Zahra, in the Prophet, in Allah, would not shake the slightest bit, because my belief is not contingent on my marja'. I know the truth through Amir al-Mu'mineen. I know the truth through Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi, through the Quran, through the Ahlul Bayt. I don't need people to show me around. So what do? You seek refuge in the Imam. Once you seek refuge in him, once you get to know him, once you familiarize with him, once you take him as your guardian and your master and your father, at that point you'll realize how other relationships were so futile and so cheap and meaningless. You stop trying to appease everyone. You stop trying to get everyone to like you and to love you and to give you their validation and to give you their approval. Like you have some people today, na'udhu billah. It's like their entire life revolves around pleasing others. When you find someone being praised by left and right, by every single person, whether they're good or bad, you know that this person is a good actor. This person is acting his role very well. The Imams of the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam said the truth at any expense, whether it made people like them or hate them, it didn't matter. You do what you have to do. But you seek refuge in the Imam alayhi salam, and then you realize that he is enough for you. He is sufficient for you. Look at what, we've run out of time, but just 2 minutes inshallah. Baneen, Salamullahi ta'ala alayha, this woman who dedicated her entire life to the Imam of her time, to the Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam. Everything she did, every step that she took, every word that she uttered, when she raised those children, she raised them as sacrificial lambs for Abu Abdullah al-Hussein. Sayyid al-Muqarram mentions in his book about Baneen, he says that once she noticed Amir al-Mu'mineen salamullahi alayhi kissing the tiny hands of Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas alayhi salam and crying, which was something she'd never seen before. Why would someone, a loving father, kiss the hands of his son and then cry? You should be delighted, you should be happy. So she said to him, Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, why do you cry? So the Imam told her of what will happen to her son Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas. And from that moment on, al-Baneen, she breastfeeds her children so that the milk would turn into and be manifested into the love of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein and loyalty for the Ahlul Bayt, as was displayed by Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas on the day of Ashura, when he fulfilled his mandate, when he did what his mother had prepared him to do his entire life, sacrificing himself for his brother, for his master, for his Imam, Abu Abdullah al-Hussein alayhi salatu wassalam. La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون والعاقبة للمتقين. Dua al-Faraj for the hastening of the reappearance of the Master, inshallah, before we get ready for Salat. اللهم كن لوليك الحجة ابن الحسن صلواتك عليه وعلى آبائه في هذه الساعة وفي كل ساعة وليا وحافظا وقائدا وناصرا ودليلا وعينا حتى تسكنه أرضك طوعا وتمتعه فيها طويلا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. إلى أرواح المؤمنين والمؤمنات والعلماء والشهداء والصالحين ومن لا يذكرهم ذاكر، نهدي لهم جميعا ثواب المجلس وثواب سورة المباركة الفاتحة مع الصلوات.